Rich man was convinced he was heirless, until he meets his ex-wife and her unexpected twins, Chairman Lee. His assistant's voice came hesitantly from the doorway. The board meeting ended 2 hours ago. Everyone has gone home. Min-ho didn't turn around. The quarterly reports? On your desk, sir. Along with the contracts for the Gangnam acquisition. And my appointments for tomorrow? Cleared until noon, as you requested. Your cardiologist appointment is at 9 a.m. At this, Min-ho's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. That will be all, Miss Park. When the door clicked shut, he finally moved to his desk. A massive slab of polished walnut that dominated the room. His fingers lingered on the edge of an unmarked folder containing his recent medical tests. He'd been ignoring the symptoms for months. The shortness of breath, the occasional tightness in his chest, the fatigue that no amount of expensive coffee could mask. The Han Enterprises building was empty now except for security and cleaning staff. Min-ho preferred it this way, the silence, the solitude. At 45, he had grown accustomed to loneliness, had convinced himself it was a necessary companion to success. He poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and sank into his chair, finally opening the folder. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, he murmured to himself, the medical term feeling foreign on his tongue. Genetic, the preliminary report said. Often hereditary. Min-ho laughed bitterly to himself, the sound hollow in the vast office. Hereditary, he repeated. What a cruel joke. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, watching it catch the light. The Han name adorned buildings across Seoul, appeared in business journals worldwide, commanded respect in boardrooms throughout Asia. Yet there was no one to inherit it all. No children, no legacy beyond cold steel and glass towers. His gaze drifted to the single personal item on his desk, a small wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. Inside lay his wedding ring, unworn for 18 years. He hadn't opened that box in over a decade, but tonight, something compelled him to lift the lid. The gold band seemed impossibly small in his palm, a relic from another life, when he had been younger, less wealthy, and paradoxically, less empty. G1, he whispered, the name rusty from disuse. His phone buzzed with an incoming message from his legal team about tomorrow's foundation meeting at Seoul Arts College. The Han Foundation, his attempt at philanthropy, at giving meaning to his accumulation of wealth. He closed the box with a decisive snap and returned to his computer. Outside, the first drops of rain began to strike against the windows, blurring the city lights. Min-ho worked through the night, as he always did, ignoring the growing ache in his chest that had nothing to do with his heart condition. COG1, he murmured, her name slipping from his lips before he could catch himself. As he straightened his tie and prepared for his cardiology appointment, memories flooded back. Not in gentle waves, but in a torrent that threatened to drown him. 18 years. 18 years since he'd watched her walk away. You look like you've seen a ghost, Chairman Lee, Dr. Kim observed as he reviewed the test results. Your condition is manageable with medication and lifestyle changes, but your stress levels are concerning. Min-ho wasn't listening. Instead, he was staring out the hospital window, his mind trapped in a summer nearly 2 decades ago. Seoul, 18 years earlier, you're late again, Ji-won said, not looking up from her book when Min-ho finally arrived at the Riverside Cafe. Her dark hair fell in a curtain around her face, hiding her expression, but he could hear the disappointment in her voice. The meeting ran long. The investors always need something, she finished for him, finally raising her eyes to meet his. Even frustrated, her gaze made his heart skip a beat, the same way it had when they'd first met 6 months ago at this very cafe, when she'd accidentally spilled her coffee on his only good suit. I'm sorry, he offered, sliding into the seat across from her. Ji-won closed her book, a collection of poetry he'd given her after their 3rd date. You've been saying that a lot lately. He reached for her hand across the table, relief washing over him when she didn't pull away. Things will settle down once this deal closes. Han Enterprises is on the verge of something big, Ji-won. Everything I'm working for, it's for us. Is it? Her question hung between them, simple but devastating in its precision. Their whirlwind romance had swept them both off their feet, the struggling music teacher and the ambitious young businessman. 6 months of breathless passion culminating in a hasty wedding that had raised eyebrows among Seoul's elite business families. Minho's mother had called it impulsive. Jiwon's friends had warned her about the sharks in the corporate world. But they'd been so certain, so foolishly confident in their love's ability to weather any storm. "Chairman Lee, did you hear what I said about the regimen?" Dr. Kim's voice snapped Minho back to the present. "Yes, medication, exercise, less stress," he replied mechanically. "Is there anything else? This condition often runs in families. Do you have children who should be tested?" The question hit like a physical blow. No, no children. That night in his penthouse, Minho found himself pulling out the old photo album he kept locked in his bedroom safe. The leather was cracked now, the pages stiff from disuse. Their wedding had been small but elegant. Ji-won had insisted on simplicity despite his offers of extravagance. She wore a traditional hanbok in pale blue silk, her smile radiant as she looked up at him. He'd been so young then, his face unlined, his eyes bright with ambition and love. "We'll build something beautiful together," he'd promised her that night. 3 months later, he was spending 18-hour days at the office. 6 months later, he'd missed their first anniversary for an emergency board meeting. By their first year, he'd moved a cot into his office. Ji-won had tried, God, how she had tried. She'd bring him dinner when he worked late, attempted to interest him in weekend trips, concerts, anything to pull him away from the gravitational force of his growing company. "I feel like I'm competing with Han Enterprises for my husband," she'd said during their last real conversation. Her voice soft but her eyes hard with resolve. "And I'm losing." 1 week later, he'd returned to an empty apartment and divorce papers on the kitchen table. The note she'd left was brief. She was accepting a music scholarship abroad. She couldn't live as the ghost in her own marriage anymore. Minho had signed the papers without contest. He told himself it was a kindness to let her go, that she deserved better than the half-life he offered her. In truth, he'd been a coward, too afraid to admit that he didn't know how to balance love and ambition, too terrified of failing at the one thing money couldn't fix. He closed the album and poured himself a drink, staring at the Seoul skyline that now bore his company's name on multiple buildings. In the morning, he would visit Seoul Arts College to finalize the details of a new art scholarship his foundation was funding. Work, always work. The faithful companion that had never left his side. "Chairman Lee will arrive in approximately 10 minutes, his driver announced. Ms. Park forwarded the agenda for today's meeting. "The Dean and Board of Trustees will meet you in the administration building." Minho nodded, his attention focused on the briefing document on his tablet. The Han Foundation's $5 million endowment would establish scholarships for underprivileged music students, a fact that business publications would dutifully report as evidence of Han Enterprises' commitment to cultural philanthropy. What they wouldn't report was how he had specifically chosen music programs, though he'd never admitted to himself why. When they pulled through the ornate gates of Seoul Arts College, Minho was struck by how different this world felt from his steel and glass corporate kingdom. Students walked between buildings carrying instrument cases, portfolios, and dreams that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or market shares. "This way, Chairman Lee." A nervous young administrator guided him toward the main building. "The dean is eager to begin the ceremony." The corridor they walked through was lined with portraits of distinguished faculty and photographs of acclaimed alumni. Minho barely glanced at them, mentally rehearsing his prepared remarks for the press conference that would follow the signing ceremony. They rounded the corner into a grand atrium where a small chamber ensemble played softly. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the marble floor. University officials, students, and local media mingled, waiting for the ceremony to begin. "Chairman Lee, what an honor to welcome you." The dean, a distinguished man in his 60s, approached with an extended hand. "Your foundation's generosity will transform countless young lives." Minho offered his practiced philanthropy smile. "Han Enterprises believes in investing in Korea's cultural future." The dean beamed. Before we begin the formal ceremony, I'd like to introduce you to the head of our string department, who will be overseeing the scholarship selections. She's one of our most distinguished faculty members. Minho nodded politely, already scanning the room for potential business connections, until the dean gestured toward a woman speaking with a group of students across the atrium. Professor Seo, the dean called. The world stopped. Even before she turned, Minho knew. Something in his body recognized her before his mind could process what was happening. The slight tilt of her head as she listened to a student, the graceful gesture of her hands as she demonstrated something about bow technique, the way she stood with one foot slightly forward. When she turned toward the dean's voice, when her eyes met his across the crowded room, 18 years collapsed into nothing. Ji-won. Her hair was shorter now, falling just below her shoulders instead of halfway down her back. Subtle strands of silver caught the light at her temples. She wore a simple charcoal dress with a single strand of pearls. Elegant, understated, exactly as he remembered her taste. But it was her eyes that undid him. The same dark, perceptive eyes that had once looked at him with love, then disappointment, and finally resignation. Now they widened in shock, her composure cracking for just an instant before she schooled her features into professional neutrality. Professor Seo Ji-won directs our string department and youth orchestra program. The dean continued, oblivious to the silent earthquake occurring before him. Professor, this is Chairman Lee Min-ho of Han Enterprises, our generous benefactor. Ji-won moved toward them with measured steps, each one seeming to echo in Min-ho's chest. He stood frozen, his carefully constructed corporate persona shattering inside him while his exterior remained rigidly composed. Chairman Lee, she said, her voice lower than he remembered, richer somehow. She extended her hand formally. Thank you for your foundation's support of our students. Min-ho took her hand automatically. Her skin was cool against his palm, and the brief contact sent electricity arcing through his body. 18 years of carefully maintained denial crumbled in an instant. Professor Seo, he managed, his voice betraying nothing while his heart thundered in his chest. The pleasure is mine. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken history, until the dean's cheerful voice broke the tension. Wonderful. Now, if you'll both join me on stage, we can begin. The ceremony. Professor Seo's students will be performing afterward to show their appreciation. As the dean moved ahead toward the small stage at the front of the atrium, Ji-won and Min-ho fell into step beside each other, separated by barely a foot of space and an ocean of unspoken words. I didn't know, Ji-won said quietly, her eyes fixed forward, voice barely audible above the ambient conversation in the room. That it was your foundation. I would have... It's fine, Min-ho interrupted, his own voice equally low. It's been a long time. She nodded once, a small, tight movement. Yes, it has. They reached the steps to the stage when Min-ho noticed movement to their right. Two young men in formal attire, carrying violin cases, approaching from a side hallway. Students, he assumed, until he saw Ji-won's expression soften as she caught sight of them. Ah, there they are, she said, and something in her tone made Min-ho turn his full attention to the approaching figures. They were tall, with the lanky build of young men not quite finished growing into their frames. As they drew closer, Min-ho felt the ground shift beneath his feet for the second time that day. The boys were identical. Same sharp jawline, same intelligent eyes, same way of carrying themselves with quiet confidence. And unmistakably, despite their Korean features that clearly came from their mother, there was something in the set of their mouths, the angle of their brows, the way they surveyed the room that was hauntingly, undeniably familiar to Min-ho. He saw it every morning in his own mirror. Ji-won's gaze flickered to Min-ho's face, watching the recognition dawn in his eyes. Chairman Lee, she said formally as the young men reached them. May I introduce Han Ju-won and Han Sung-min, our lead violinists who will be performing after the ceremony. A beat of silence, heavy with implication. My sons. The world narrowed to a pinpoint. Min-ho stared at the two young men, 17, his mind calculated automatically, who looked back at him with polite curiosity, completely unaware that they were meeting their father for the first time. "Chairman Lee," the dean called from the stage. "Are you ready to begin?" Minho couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process the earthquake that had just demolished his entire understanding of his life. Twin sons, his sons, with Ji-won's grace and his own features, standing before him as strangers. "Chairman Lee is feeling a bit under the weather," Ji-won smoothly intervened, her years of performance training evident in her composed demeanor. "Perhaps a moment of fresh air before we begin?" But it was too late for composure. One of the twins, Sung-min or Ju-won, Minho couldn't tell which, tilted his head in a gesture so achingly familiar that Minho felt physical pain lance through his chest. "Are you all right, sir?" the young man asked, his voice a deeper echo of Ji-won's musical tones. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Minho looked from the twins to Ji-won, whose face had gone carefully, perfectly blank. The expression he remembered from their final days together, when she'd hidden her pain behind a wall of quiet dignity. When the twins performed, a complex Bach duet that showcased their technical brilliance, Minho could barely breathe. Their synchronization was uncanny, as though they shared a single musical consciousness. One played with passionate intensity, the other with mathematical precision, two sides of the same coin. Two sides of him. Cameras flashed, hands were shaken, documents were signed. Minho moved through it all like a man underwater, hearing everything through a distorted filter. When the formal ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Minho signaled to his assistant, "Clear my schedule for the rest of the day." "But sir, the merger meeting—" "Cancel it," he said with such finality that she simply nodded and retreated. Minho watched Ji-won speaking with several faculty members, her professional smile firmly in place. The twins had disappeared, presumably to put away their instruments. He waited, heart pounding, until she was momentarily alone, then approached. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Ji-won glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. "Now isn't the time, Minho." "When?" She hesitated, conflict visible in her eyes. "My office. 20 minutes. 3rd floor, East Wing, room 312. Minho paced the small office, examining the certificates on the walls, the neatly arranged shelves of music books, the framed photographs of Ji-won with orchestras around the world. There were several photos of the twins at various ages, playing in youth orchestras, receiving awards, standing at the Great Wall of China during what appeared to be a tour. A lifetime of moments he had missed. The door opened, and Ji-won entered alone, closing it firmly behind her. She stood with her back against it for a moment, as though needing the physical support. "The boys have rehearsal," she said. "They won't be joining us. They're my sons." The words emerged as a statement, not a question. Ji-won moved to her desk, maintaining distance between them. "Yes, 17 years. 17 years, 4 months and 12 days. She corrected with quiet precision. Minho felt dizzy with the implications. "You were pregnant when you left. I didn't know until 3 weeks later. And you didn't think to tell me?" His voice rose slightly, the first crack in his composure. Ji-won's eyebrows raised a fraction. "I tried, Minho. For months I tried. I never received any. I called your office 23 times. I sent 7 letters. I even came to your building twice. But your assistant, Ms. Park, is it? Still the same woman? She said you were unavailable and wouldn't be taking personal calls or visits." Minho stared at her, confusion giving way to dawning horror. "Yuna wouldn't have. She did." Ji-won's voice was flat, factual. "The last time I called, she told me quite clearly that you had instructed her to screen all communications from me, that the divorce was final, and that any attempts to extract additional financial settlements would be met with legal action." "I never gave such instructions," Minho said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Well, that's what I was told." Ji-won clasped her hands in front of her, knuckles white with tension. "After the 2nd trimester, when I learned I was carrying twins, I tried one last time. I sent a registered letter to your home address." Minho shook his head slowly. I never received it. Your mother did. The pieces suddenly snapped into terrible focus. His mother, the formidable matriarch who had never approved of his hasty marriage to a penniless music teacher, who had reminded him constantly that he needed a suitable wife from a good family, who had seemed almost pleased when the divorce was finalized. My mother intercepted your communications. She called me personally. Ji-won's voice finally betrayed emotion, a tremor of old pain. She said you knew about the pregnancy, but wanted nothing to do with children who would complicate your corporate ascension. She offered money for my silence and other options. Other options? Min-ho felt sick. To terminate the pregnancy. Ji-won's eyes hardened. I hung up on her. That was the last contact I had with anyone from your family until today. Min-ho sank into the chair opposite her desk, the weight of 18 years of manipulation and lies crushing down on him. Ji-won, I had no idea. I would never— It doesn't matter now, she interrupted. What's done is done. It matters. He slammed his palm against her desk, the sound sharp in the small office. They're my sons. 17 years. Birthdays. First steps. First days of school. Everything stolen from me. Stolen from you? Ji-won's calm facade cracked, revealing a flash of the anger she'd suppressed for nearly 2 decades. You were building your precious empire, Min-ho. You chose Han Enterprises over our marriage every single day. What would you have done differently if you'd known about the twins? Penciled in father between board meetings. The truth in her words struck him like a physical blow. Would he have been any different? The ambitious young executive, so determined to prove himself, to build something monumental, would he have made time for midnight feedings and first words? You're right, he admitted, the anger draining from him. I was consumed, but they deserved to know their father, and I deserved to know them. Ji-won's expression softened slightly. Perhaps, but we can't change the past. Tell me about them, Min-ho asked, his voice almost pleading. Please. Ji-won regarded him for a long moment before her shoulders relaxed slightly. Sung-min is the sensitive one. He feels music in his bones. It's not just technique for him, it's language. He wants to be a composer. Ju-won is more analytical. He sees patterns in everything, breaks problems down to their elements. He plays with his head as much as his heart. They're both so talented. Yes, she agreed, a mother's pride warming her voice. They work hard. They're good boys, Min-ho. Do they know about me? That I'm their father? Ji-won shook her head. They know their father was a businessman I was briefly married to when I was young. That's all. They stopped asking for details years ago. Min-ho absorbed this with a sharp pang. What have you told them about why I wasn't in their lives? That sometimes adults make complicated choices. Ji-won's gaze was steady. I never vilified you, if that's what you're asking. I didn't want them to grow up with hatred in their hearts. A knock at the door interrupted them. Ji-won glanced at her watch with surprise. That can't be the boys already. She opened the door to reveal Min-ho's assistant, Yuna Park, looking flustered. A rare state for the normally unflappable woman who had been with him for nearly 20 years. Chairman Lee, she said, bowing apologetically. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but there's an urgent matter requiring your immediate attention. The merger. Min-ho cut her off with a raised hand. I told you to reschedule. Yes, sir, but Mr. Kong is threatening to walk away entirely if you don't speak with him personally within the hour, and the shareholders are— Min-ho's gaze shifted between his assistant and Ji-won, who had retreated behind her professional mask once again. The familiar pull of business obligation tugged at him, the automatic calculation of losses, risks, market impacts already running through his mind. Then his eyes fell on the photograph of the twins on Ji-won's desk. His sons, smiling, unknown to him, and something crystallized within him. Ms. Park, he said with calm authority, please inform Mr. Kong that he is welcome to walk away. In fact, tell him the merger offer is rescinded. Then call my lawyer and have him meet me here in 1 hour. Yuna's eyes widened in shock. Sir, that merger represents nearly 30% of our projected growth for the next fiscal year. And you've been intercepting personal communications intended for me for the past 18 years. Minho continued, his voice eerily calm. Including information about my children. The color drained from Yuna's face. Chairman Lee, I don't... 1 hour, Ms. Park. My lawyer. Here. He closed the door firmly in her face, then turned back to Ji-won, who was staring at him with undisguised astonishment. You just torpedoed a major business deal. Yes. Why? Minho looked at her directly, letting her see the raw truth in his eyes. Because I've just discovered I have 2 sons I've never met and nothing. Not Han Enterprises, not the shareholders, not the entire Korean economy, is more important than that right now. Ji-won studied his face carefully, searching for the ambitious young man who had once chosen spreadsheets over anniversary dinners. Instead, she found a middle-aged man with regret etched into the lines around his eyes and determination setting his jaw. The boys will be finishing rehearsal soon, she finally said. They'll have questions. They're coming up now, Ji-won said, returning from her call to the rehearsal hall. She paused, studying Minho's tense shoulders. Are you sure you want to do this today? It's a lot to process for everyone. I've lost 17 years, Minho replied, his voice rough with emotion. I don't want to lose another day. Ji-won nodded, her expression softening. For what it's worth, I think you're right. But Minho, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. They're teenagers. This won't be easy. Before he could respond, footsteps approached in the hallway. Ji-won opened the door to reveal the twins, still in their performance attire, violin cases slung over their shoulders. Up close, the resemblance to Minho was even more striking. The same height, the same angular jawline he'd inherited from his own father. Mom! Sung-min spoke first, his questioning gaze shifting from Ji-won to Minho. Professor Cho said you wanted to see us urgently. Is everything okay? Ji-won added, his analytical eyes already assessing the unusual situation. Come in, boys, Ji-won said gently. We need to talk. The twins exchanged a glance, one of those wordless communications that only identical twins seem capable of, before entering and setting down their instrument cases. Minho stood, his heart hammering against his ribs. You're the chairman from the ceremony, Ji-won observed, formal and polite. Is there a problem with the scholarship program? No, Minho said, his voice barely steady. That's not why I'm here. Ji-won gestured for everyone to sit. Boys, there's something important I need to tell you. Something I should have told you long ago. The twins sat side by side on the small couch, unconsciously mirroring each other's posture. Ji-won remained standing, her teacher's instinct for command of a room evident in her stance. You know I was married briefly before you were born, she began. To our father, Sung-min said. The businessman who was too busy for a family. The simple description pierced Minho like a blade. Is that all he'd been reduced to in their minds? Ji-won took a deep breath. Yes, what I never told you is his name, or the full circumstances of our separation. She paused, then extended her hand toward Minho. This is Lee Minho, chairman of Han Enterprises. Your father. The silence that followed was absolute. Sung-min's eyes widened in shock, while Ju-won's narrowed in calculation. Neither boy moved, as though afraid the slightest motion might shatter the moment into irretrievable pieces. That's not funny, Mom, Sung-min finally said, his voice cracking slightly. I'm not joking, sweetheart, Ji-won replied softly. Chairman Lee is your biological father. Ju-won's analytical mind engaged first. But you always said our father knew about us but chose his career instead. I believed that was true, Ji-won admitted. I've just learned today that he never received any of my attempts to contact him about my pregnancy. His assistant and his mother intercepted my calls and letters. Is that true? Ju-won demanded, addressing Minho directly for the first time, his tone sharp with 17 years of accumulated questions. Minho met his son's skeptical gaze. Yes, I never knew, Ji-won, your mother was expecting. If I had known. His voice faltered momentarily. If I had known, everything would have been different. How convenient, Sungmin muttered, the pain beneath his sarcasm evident. You find out you have heirs right when you need them. Minho flinched at the word heirs, at the cold, transactional implication. This isn't about inheritance or Han Enterprises, he said firmly. This is about the fact that I have two sons I never knew existed until today. And what do you want from us now? Ju-won asked, his logical mind already working through scenarios and outcomes. Some kind of relationship? Forgiveness? What? The directness of the question caught Minho off guard. What did he want? He hadn't thought beyond this moment, beyond the desperate need to meet them, to see them, to confirm their existence. I want a chance, he said finally. A chance to know you both. A chance to be part of your lives if you'll allow it. We've managed fine without you for 17 years, Sungmin said, the artistic twins' emotions closer to the surface. Mom has been everything to us. Your mother has done an amazing job raising you, Minho acknowledged, glancing at Ji-won with genuine admiration. Better than I could have done alone. I'm not trying to replace what you have or pretend the past didn't happen. Ji-won finally sat down, placing herself between the boys and Minho. I've made mistakes too, she admitted. I should have tried harder to reach your father. I should have told you more as you got older. Why now? Ju-won asked, ever practical. Why reveal all this today? Because we ran into each other by chance at the ceremony, Ji-won explained. Neither of us knew the other would be there. Minho leaned forward slightly. When I saw you both perform, something felt familiar. Then when I learned who you were, he swallowed hard. I've missed your entire lives. Your first words, first steps, first days of school. I can't get those back. But I'd like to be there for what comes next, if you'll let me. Sungmin stood abruptly, pacing to the window. This is insane. Yesterday everything was normal, and today you're saying our whole life story has been, what? A mistake? A misunderstanding? Not a mistake, Ji-won said firmly. Never that. You two are the best things that ever happened to me. To us, Minho amended quietly. Ju-won studied Minho with clinical detachment. You really didn't know about us? No, I swear it. And if you had known? The question hung in the air, heavy, with implications. Minho knew the boys deserved honesty, not comfortable platitudes. 17 years ago, I was obsessed with building Han Enterprises, he admitted. I was young and blinded by ambition. I can't promise I would have been a perfect father then. He met Ju-won's calculating gaze directly. But I would have tried. I would have been there. And knowing what I know now, what I've missed, I would give up everything I've built to have those years back. Sungmin turned from the window. Pretty words from a businessman. Minho felt a flash of frustration, then reminded himself that these boys had every right to their anger and suspicion. I understand your skepticism, but I'm not asking for immediate trust or forgiveness. Just time. A chance to show you who I am now, not who I was when I lost your mother. The twins exchanged another of their silent communications before Ju-won spoke. We need to think about this. It's too much to process right now. Of course, Ji-won said quickly. Take all the time you need. Minho pulled a business card from his wallet, then seemed to reconsider and instead tore a blank page from Ji-won's notepad, writing down his personal number. This is my private line. Not my office, not my assistant. Directly to me. If you want to talk, I'll answer. Anytime, day or night. He held out the paper, uncertain if either boy would take it. After a moment's hesitation, Ju-won reached for it, folding it precisely before tucking it into his pocket. We have a recital next Friday, he said, his voice carefully neutral. At the Sejong Center, if you're interested in hearing us play something more substantial than Bach duets. Minho's heart leapt at this smallest of openings. I would be honored. Sungmin grabbed his violin case. I need some air, he announced, heading for the door. He paused with his hand on the knob, not looking back. Our middle names. Where did they come from? Minho looked questioningly at Ji-won, who smiled faintly. Ju-won means inherited stone, And Sungmin means achieved jade, she explained. I chose them because... She hesitated. Because your father once told me his greatest ambition was to transform the rough stone of his family business into something as precious and enduring as jade. I wanted you both to carry a piece of that dream, even if you never knew him. Sungmin absorbed this in silence before slipping out the door. Ju-won lingered a moment longer. I have your eyes, he said to Min-ho, the observation delivered like a scientific finding. And Sungmin has your hands. We used to wonder about those things. Then he too was gone, leaving Min-ho and Ji-won alone with 17 years of absence stretching between them. They're remarkable, Min-ho said softly. Yes, Ji-won agreed. They are. She gathered her things, clearly signaling the end of this extraordinary meeting. The recital starts at 7 next Friday. Don't be late. The confrontation with his mother had been as painful as it was necessary. You had no right, he told her in her elegant living room filled with artifacts of family heritage. They are my sons. I was protecting you, she had insisted, her imperial posture never faltering. That woman would have trapped you, destroyed everything your father built, everything I sacrificed for. They're your grandsons, Min-ho had responded, his voice breaking. Didn't you ever want to know them? The flicker of something, regret, perhaps, had crossed her face before the familiar mask of family duty returned. The Lee bloodline continues through legitimate channels, not through hasty mistakes. He'd left without another word, the chasm between them wider than ever before. Now, as he settled into his seat near the front of the concert hall, Min-ho glanced around nervously, wondering if Ji-won would appear, if the boys had changed their minds about his attendance. The past week had been silent. No calls from the number he'd given them. No messages through intermediaries. The hall began to fill, the murmur of the crowd rising as the performance time approached. Min-ho checked his watch repeatedly, anxiety mounting with each passing minute. At precisely 6:45, he felt a presence beside him and looked up to find Ji-won standing in the aisle. You came, she said, a note of surprise in her voice despite her composed expression. I said I would. Ji-won hesitated, then slid into the empty seat beside him. The boys know you're here. Ji-won asked if you'd come. And Sungmin? Ji-won's smile was tinged with sadness. He pretended not to care, but he changed his performance piece yesterday. He feels things deeply. Min-ho nodded, understanding this glimpse into his son's character as the precious gift it was. Thank you for sitting with me. Don't read too much into it, she cautioned. I'm just tired of being alone at these events. The lights dimmed before Min-ho could respond, and the recital began. Several students performed, their talents evident but clearly eclipsed when Ju-won took the stage with Box Shakon from Partita No. 2. His technical precision was breathtaking, each note executed with mathematical perfection. Min-ho watched, transfixed, as his son's expressions remained controlled, his body swaying only slightly with the music's most intense passages. When Ju-won finished to enthusiastic applause, he bowed formally, his eyes scanning the audience until they found Min-ho. For the briefest moment, something passed between them, acknowledgement, perhaps, or the faintest beginning of connection. After a brief intermission, Sungmin appeared on stage. Min-ho sat forward, struck by how identical yet utterly different he appeared from his brother. Where Ju-won had been contained, Sungmin radiated barely controlled energy. He's changed his piece to Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto, Ji-won whispered. It's more emotional than what he'd planned. The first notes confirmed her assessment. Where Ju-won had played with precision, Sungmin played with passion, his body bending and swaying, his face contorting with the music's changing moods. Min-ho found himself holding his breath during the most intense passages, feeling each note as if it were being torn directly from his son's heart. When Sungmin reached the final movement, tears streamed freely down Min-ho's face. Ji-won silently offered him a tissue, her own eyes glistening. He's playing for you, she said so quietly Min-ho almost missed it. All the questions, all the anger, all the wondering. He's playing it all for you. The realization hit Minho with physical force. This wasn't merely a performance. It was a communication. His son's only language for 17 years of absence. When the piece concluded, the audience erupted in applause. Sungmin's eyes locked with Minho's across the distance, unflinching, challenging. Minho rose to his feet, applauding until his hands burned, trying to transmit back to his son everything he couldn't yet say. After the recital, Minho and Ji-won waited in the lobby. Students and parents milled about, congratulating performers, taking photos. Minho's anxiety mounted as the minutes passed with no sign of the twins. Maybe they changed their minds, he said, checking his watch for the 20th time. Give them time, Ji-won replied. This isn't easy for any of us. Finally, the twins emerged from the performers' area, still carrying their instruments. They paused when they spotted Minho and Ji-won, exchanging a glance before approaching. That was extraordinary, Minho said, his voice thick with emotion. Both of you. I've never heard anything so. Did you mean what you said last week? Sungmin interrupted, his directness reminiscent of his mother. About wanting a chance? Minho nodded. Every word. Even the part about giving up Han Enterprises? Ji-won asked, ever the pragmatist. Because we looked you up. You're on the Forbes list. People call you the Dragon of Korean finance. Would you really walk away from that? Minho felt the weight of their scrutiny, knew that his answer might determine whether any relationship was possible. Han Enterprises was my father's dream before it was mine, he said slowly. I built it into what it is today because I was trying to prove something, to him, to my mother, to myself. But it's just a company. You are my sons. Prove it, Sungmin challenged, his eyes burning with the same intensity he'd shown on stage. How? Ji-won adjusted his glasses. We've discussed it. We have a proposal. Minho glanced at Ji-won, who looked as surprised as he felt. I'm listening. The Seoul Youth Symphony is touring Europe this summer, Ji-won explained. 3 weeks, 6 countries. We've both been selected. That's wonderful, Minho said, genuine pride swelling in his chest. Congratulations. Mom was going to chaperone, Sungmin continued. But what if you came too? Minho blinked in surprise. Both of us. The twins nodded in unison. 3 weeks, Ji-won said. No business calls, no emergency meetings, no assistance. Just trying to know each other. See if there's anything worth building. It's a test, Sungmin added bluntly. To see if you mean what you say or if it's just more empty promises. Minho looked at Ji-won, whose expression was carefully neutral. Would you be okay with that arrangement? He asked her. This isn't about me, she replied. It's about them, about what they need. Minho turned back to his sons. 3 weeks in Europe. No business. Just us. He extended his hand. I accept your proposal. After a moment's hesitation, Ji-won shook it formally. Sungmin still held back, arms crossed. One condition, he said. Before the tour, you have to come to Sunday dinner. At our apartment. And you have to cook. Minho's eyebrows rose. Cook? Mom says you used to cook for her when you were dating, Sungmin said. Before you got too important for domestic things. Ji-won winced. I might have mentioned that once or twice. I haven't cooked properly in years, Minho admitted. That's the point, Ji-won said with the faintest hint of a smile. We want to see if Chairman Lee remembers how to be just Minho. The challenge was clear, the symbolism unmistakable. Minho straightened his shoulders. Sunday at what time? 6, Sungmin answered. Don't be late. And don't bring anything expensive, Ji-won added. No gifts, no bribes. Just food. Minho nodded solemnly. I'll be there. The twins exchanged another of their private glances before turning to leave with their mother. As they walked away, Sungmin hesitated and looked back. The Tchaikovsky, he said, his voice softer than Minho had yet heard it. I played it because it's about struggle and redemption, about fighting through darkness to find light. He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. Just thought you should know." Then they were gone, leaving Min-ho alone in the lobby, his heart fuller than it had been in 18 years, and the weight of Sunday's dinner already pressing on his shoulders. As he stepped out into the Seoul night, Min-ho pulled out his phone and made a call. "Mrs. Kim?" he said when his housekeeper answered. "That cookbook from the bottom shelf in the study, the one with all my notes from cooking school. Could you find it for me? And maybe dust off the chef's knives I haven't used in 2 decades. The modest apartment building in Hongdae was a far cry from his penthouse in Gangnam. Min-ho had arrived an hour early, grocery bags in hand, determined to prepare everything on-site rather than having it catered. A thought that had admittedly crossed his mind before he dismissed it as the coward's way out. Ji-won had greeted him with surprise. "You really came to cook." "I said I would," he'd replied, the phrase becoming something of a mantra between them. Now he stood in her small kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of his efforts. Bulgogi marinating in a stone bowl, japchae noodles glistening with sesame oil, banchan side dishes arranged in a neat row. His hands moved with increasing confidence as muscle memory returned, his body remembering what his mind had nearly forgotten. Ji-won leaned against the doorframe, watching him. "You look different. Less intimidating without the power suit?" Min-ho asked with a slight smile. "More like the person I married," she replied softly. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and for a moment, the years between them compressed into nothing. Then the front door opened, breaking the spell. "Something smells amazing," Ju-won's voice called out. "Is that doenjang jjigae?" Sung-min added, appearing in the kitchen doorway. He stopped short, staring at Min-ho. "You actually cooked?" Min-ho nodded, suddenly nervous under his son's scrutiny. "Family recipe. My grandmother taught me." "Our grandmother," Ju-won corrected, joining his brother. Technically, the simple acknowledgement of kinship caught Min-ho off guard. "Yes," he managed. "Your grandmother. Is she still alive?" Sung-min asked, his tone deliberately casual as he inspected the food. "No," Min-ho said, the old grief resurfacing. "She passed away while your mother and I were still married. She would have loved you both. Unlike our other grandmother," Ju-won observed clinically. Min-ho paused in his stirring. "My mother is complicated. Her world is defined by duty and appearance. But that's not an excuse. Do we have to meet her?" Sung-min asked, the question revealing a vulnerability beneath his defiant exterior. "Not until you're ready," Min-ho promised. "And not until she's ready to acknowledge her mistakes." Ji-won moved to set the table, gesturing for the twins to help. "Let's eat before it gets cold." The 4 of them sat around the small dining table, the moment weighted with significance. Min-ho waited as Ji-won served rice, then carefully ladled his creations onto their plates. "This is how we ate before," Ji-won explained to the twins. "Your father cooking, me setting the table. Before Han Enterprises consumed everything." Min-ho accepted the subtle dig with a nod. "I forgot what mattered." "Well, let's see if you've forgotten how to cook too," Sung-min challenged, lifting his chopsticks. The first bite was taken in tense silence. Min-ho watched anxiously as his sons tasted each dish, their expressions carefully controlled. After what felt like an eternity, Ju-won looked up. "The doenjang jjigae tastes like Mom's," he said, surprise evident in his voice. Ji-won smiled. "Because I learned to make it from your father. This is actually his recipe." "You never told us that," Sung-min said accusingly. "There are many things I should have told you," she admitted. "But some memories were difficult." Silence fell again as they continued eating, less tense now but still cautious. Min-ho searched for safe topics, terrified of saying the wrong thing. "Your performance the other night," he finally ventured. "The technical skill was remarkable. Where did you both learn to play like that?" "Mom worked extra jobs to pay for lessons," Sung-min said pointedly. "The scholarship helped later," Ju-won added, more diplomatically. "But yes, Mom sacrificed a lot." Min-ho nodded, accepting the implicit criticism. "I understand, and I know I can't make up for not being there." He set down his chopsticks, meeting their gazes directly. But I'd like to know everything I've missed. Not just the accomplishments, the struggles too. The everyday moments. Why? Sungmin challenged. So you can feel better about abandoning us? I didn't know you existed, Minho reminded him gently. But that doesn't change the outcome. You grew up without a father, and I want to understand what that was like for you. Not to ease my conscience, but to know you. It was hard, Ju-won said simply. Watching other kids with their dads at school events. Having to check deceased on forms because it was easier than explaining. Minho winced. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix anything, Sungmin muttered. No, Minho agreed. It doesn't. But maybe time can help, if you're willing to give me some. The twins exchanged one of their silent communications before Ju-won spoke. The Europe tour is still the deal. 3 weeks, then we decide if we want you in our lives. That seems fair, Minho said, though his heart contracted at the possibility they might ultimately reject him. Have you told your company you're taking 3 weeks off? Sungmin asked skeptically. Minho reached for his phone, placed it on the table and pulled up his calendar app. I'm showing you this because I want you to know I'm serious, he said, turning the screen toward them. My schedule for the next 3 months. The twins leaned forward, examining the blocks of color representing his commitments. The 3 weeks of the Europe tour were completely clear, a white space in a sea of appointments. You could add things later, Sungmin pointed out suspiciously. You're right to be skeptical, Minho acknowledged. So I've done something else. He opened his email and showed them a company-wide announcement. I've appointed an acting CEO during my absence. The board has been informed that I'll be completely unreachable for family reasons. Ju-won's eyebrows rose. That's significant. You are significant, Minho replied simply. A fragile silence descended as they finished their meal. When the dishes were cleared, Ji-won brought out a photo album. I thought you might want to see some of what you missed, she said, placing it before Minho. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the cover. The first photo showed Ji-won in a hospital bed, holding 2 tiny bundles, her face exhausted but radiant. The day they were born, she explained. 14 hours of labor. Sungmin came first, then Ju-won 7 minutes later. Minho traced the image with his fingertip. I should have been there. Yes, Ji-won agreed without accusation. But you're here now. They spent the next hour turning pages. Ji-won and the twins taking turns explaining each milestone captured in the photographs. First steps, first birthday celebrations, school performances, competitions. A visual chronicle of all Minho had missed. When they reached the boys' 16th birthday, Minho paused at an image of them standing proudly with their instruments, a small cake between them. Was this taken here? He asked, noticing the background. No, Ji-won said quietly. That was at my mother's house. She passed away last winter. Minho looked up sharply. I didn't know. Ji-won, I'm so sorry. How could you know? She shrugged, but the grief was still evident in her voice. She was the best grandmother, Sungmin said, a rare moment of unguarded emotion. She came to every recital, even when she was sick. She sounds wonderful, Minho said sincerely. She hated you, Ju-won informed him matter-of-factly. She called you that heartless bastard who abandoned my daughter. Despite the harshness of the words, Minho found himself laughing. I can't blame her. I would have felt the same way about someone who hurt my child. Our child, Ji-won corrected softly. The moment hung between them, heavy with implication. Do you have any photos? Sungmin asked suddenly. From before? When you and Mom were together? Minho nodded, reaching for his wallet. I've carried this for 18 years. He carefully extracted a worn photograph, showing himself and Ji-won standing beneath cherry blossoms, his arm around her waist, both laughing at something now forgotten. You both look so young, Ju-won observed, studying the image. We were, Ji-won agreed, just starting out, full of dreams. What happened? Sungmin asked, looking between them. Really happened, not the censored version. Minho and Ji-won exchanged glances, silently negotiating who would speak. Finally, Minho began. I inherited my father's company during our first year of marriage. It was failing, massive debt, outdated operations, declining market share. My mother believed the only solution was to follow the old ways. Sacrifice everything personal for business success. And you agreed with her? Sung-min said, accusation evident. I thought I could do both, Minho admitted. Be a good husband and save the company. I was wrong. I started staying later at the office, traveling more, missing dinners, anniversaries. He was trying to save thousands of jobs, Ji-won added unexpectedly. That part one understood. It was the rest that broke us. The rest, Ji-won prompted. Minho's expression darkened. I started to believe my own press, the young corporate savior, turning around a dying company. I let people flatter me, convince me my time was too valuable for ordinary concerns. He changed, Ji-won said simply. Or maybe he just became who he always would have been. That's not fair, Minho objected, a flash of the old defensiveness returning. You knew who I was when we married. I never pretended business wasn't important to me. Important, yes. All-consuming, no, Ji-won countered. There's a difference between ambition and obsession, Minho. The twins watched this exchange with rapt attention, witnessing for the first time the dynamic between their parents. You're right, Minho conceded after a moment. I lost perspective. By the time I realized what was happening, you were gone. I left a note, Ji-won reminded him, asking you to choose us or the company. I never saw it, Minho said quietly. Yuna intercepted it, like she did your calls about the pregnancy. Ji-won's eyes widened. The assistant I always had to go through? She was blocking my messages. Minho nodded grimly. With my mother's blessing, they decided you were a distraction from my potential. And now, Sung-min demanded, are we distractions too? No, Minho said firmly. You are my legacy. The company is just a company. Pretty words, Ji-won noted, echoing his brother's earlier skepticism. But the European tour will be the proof. Minho nodded, accepting the challenge. 3 weeks. No business. Just us. As the evening drew to a close, Minho helped clear the dishes despite Ji-won's protests. The domesticity of the act felt foreign after so many years of corporate luxury, yet oddly comforting too. At the door, an awkward moment arose. How to say goodbye to sons who were still partly strangers. Minho settled for a formal bow, which the twins returned with identical precision. The food was good, Sung-min admitted grudgingly, especially the doenjang jjigae. High praise, Ji-won translated with a small smile. He's our resident food critic. Thank you for giving me this chance, Minho said, addressing all three of them. I know I haven't earned it. Not yet, Ji-won agreed. But today was a start. Minho adjusted his camera strap, already filled with hundreds of photographs. Physical evidence of moments he was determined never to forget. The past 14 days had been the strangest combination of exhaustion and exhilaration he'd ever experienced. Every interaction with his sons a delicate dance of discovery. This is where Mozart premiered The Marriage of Figaro, Ji-won was explaining, his encyclopedic knowledge of classical music venues on full display. The acoustics are considered some of the finest in Europe. Did you memorize the entire guidebook? Sung-min teased, nudging his brother as they walked. Some of us like to be prepared, Ji-won replied primly, adjusting his glasses. Minho smiled at their banter. These small glimpses into their relationship were precious to him. The way Sung-min needled his brother. The way Ji-won pretended to be annoyed but always had his twins back. It was like watching two sides of himself in conversation, the passionate impulse and the analytical mind. The concert tomorrow is sold out, Ji-won said, falling into step beside Minho. The Austrian press has been very generous to our students. It's well-deserved, Minho replied. though I admit I'm biased toward certain performers. Ji-won smiled, her expression softer than it had been at the beginning of their journey. The constant proximity had worn away some of the sharper edges between them, revealing glimpses of the easy companionship they'd once shared. "Are you holding up okay?" she asked quietly. "No business withdrawal symptoms?" Minho laughed. "I haven't checked stock prices in 3 days. I think that's a personal record." "The boys have noticed," she said, nodding toward the twins walking ahead of them. "Sungmin mentioned that you haven't been on your phone during their rehearsals." "I'm learning to be present," Minho admitted. "It's harder than I expected, but more rewarding too." They paused at a street cafe, the twins already examining the menu with the enthusiasm of teenagers, perpetually hungry despite the heavy Austrian meals they'd consumed at lunch. "Hot chocolate," Sungmin declared, pointing to a decadent photograph of whipped cream-topped mugs. "It's what you're supposed to have in Vienna." "With apple strudel," Ju-won added authoritatively. "It's traditional." Minho pulled out his wallet, but Sungmin shook his head. "We've got it," he said, pulling out a small billfold. "Our busking money." Minho raised an eyebrow. "Busking? They've been performing in public squares during free time," Ji-won explained with evident pride, "earning quite a following and a decent amount of euros." "That's enterprising," Minho said, genuinely impressed. Ju-won shrugged. "Coach Kim says performance experience is valuable in any context. Plus tourists pay well for Vivaldi," Sungmin added with a grin. As they settled at a table, Minho noticed how the twins unconsciously mirrored each other's posture. Ju-won's more controlled, Sungmin's more relaxed, but with the same underlying rhythm to their movements. In the evening light, with the historic architecture of Vienna surrounding them, the moment felt fragile and perfect. 2 weeks down, 1 to go, Ju-won observed, his analytical mind always tracking progress. "How are you finding the experiment so far, Chairman Lee?" Minho recognized the formality as his son's way of creating emotional distance before their eventual evaluation of his worthiness to remain in their lives. "I'm finding that I've missed more than I realized," he answered honestly. "Not just your childhoods, but the chance to know myself as a father." "Still having regrets about the company?" Sungmin challenged, stirring his hot chocolate with unnecessary vigor. "No regrets about being here," Minho corrected. "The company will survive without me. I'm not sure I would have survived much longer without this." "Dramatic," Sungmin scoffed, but his expression was curious rather than dismissive. "I mean it," Minho insisted. "Success without meaning is just activity. Watching you both perform, hearing you practice, even arguing with you about which museum to visit. It's given me something Han Enterprises never could. A family?" Ji-won suggested quietly. "A heart?" Minho amended, looking at each of them. "My own heart, which I think I misplaced somewhere in a boardroom about 18 years ago." Ju-won's analytical expression softened slightly. "That's an interesting metaphor." Sungmin rolled his eyes at his brother's response, but his own expression was thoughtful as he attacked his strudel. Their conversation shifted to plans for the next day. Final rehearsal in the morning, afternoon free time, evening performance. The easy rhythm of their interactions had developed gradually over the tour, periods of awkwardness giving way to tentative connection. As they walked back to their hotel through Vienna's elegant streets, Minho's phone buzzed in his pocket. He automatically reached for it, then hesitated, glancing at his sons walking ahead with Ji-won. Ju-won noticed the motion. "You can check it," he said with unexpected gentleness. "We trust you." Those 3 words, "we trust you," hit Minho with staggering force. He pulled out the phone to find a message from his executive assistant. "Board meeting emergency decision required. Crisis with Chinese partnership. Please call immediately." 2 weeks ago, such a message would have sent Minho racing for a private room, barking orders and rearranging schedules. Now he hesitated, looking from the screen to his family. "Problem?" Ji-won asked, reading his expression with the familiarity that had never quite faded. "Han Enterprises wants an emergency decision," he admitted, deciding honesty was the only possible approach. Something about the Chinese partnership. The twins exchanged glances, their silent communication as impenetrable as ever. "It's okay if you need to call," Ju-won said formally. "We understand business emergencies exist. We're just your trial run anyway," Sung-min added with practiced indifference that didn't quite mask the hurt beneath. Min-ho looked at his sons. Really looked at them. Ju-won's careful neutrality concealing disappointment. Sung-min's defensive posture bracing for rejection. The familiar patterns of children who had learned to expect absence where presence should be. "No," Min-ho said firmly, turning off his phone completely. "Whatever it is, the acting CEO can handle it. That's why I appointed him. But if it's a real emergency," Ji-won began. "Then it will still be an emergency tomorrow," Min-ho finished. "Tonight, I'm exactly where I need to be." The twins tried to mask their surprise, but Min-ho caught the quick look they exchanged. A mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. "There's an ice cream place near the hotel that's supposed to be amazing," Min-ho suggested, changing the subject deliberately. "Anyone interested?" "It's nearly midnight," Ji-won pointed out. "Perfect time for ice cream," Sung-min declared, his mood visibly brightening. "I vote yes. The place has been operating since 1886, Ju-won noted, already pulling up details on his phone. "Their specialty is a chocolate hazelnut blend that supposedly inspired Empress Elizabeth herself." Min-ho smiled, falling into step beside his sons. "Lead the way, then." As they continued through Vienna's lamplit streets, the tension gradually dissipated. By the time they reached the historic ice cream parlor, Sung-min was animatedly describing a technique his violin coach had suggested for the problematic passage in his Paganini piece, his hands gesturing expressively as he spoke. "What did you play before business took over?" he asked Min-ho suddenly, catching him off guard. "Piano," Min-ho admitted. "Not very well, but with enthusiasm. My teacher said I had more passion than precision." Sung-min grinned. "That's what they say about me too." Ju-won got all the precision. "And you got all the heart?" Ju-won countered with the easy affection of long brotherhood. "Maybe I should play for you sometime," Min-ho offered hesitantly, "though I'm terribly out of practice." "There's a piano in the hotel lobby," Ji-won pointed out. "I've seen you looking at it." Min-ho felt unexpectedly vulnerable. "You'd probably all be disappointed. 18 years is a long time to go without playing." "We promise not to judge," Ju-won said solemnly. "Much." The teasing note in his normally serious son's voice made Min-ho laugh. "I'll consider it." After ice cream, later that night, as the hotel lobby emptied of other guests, Min-ho found himself seated before the gleaming grand piano. His sons and Ji-won arranged on nearby couches. His fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly as performance anxiety, something he hadn't felt since his corporate ascension, washed over him. "You don't have to," Ji-won said gently, sensing his discomfort. "I want to," Min-ho replied, taking a deep breath. "Just be kind in your critiques." "No promises," Sung-min said with a grin that somehow managed to be both challenging and encouraging. Min-ho began with simple scales, reacquainting himself with the feel of the keys. Then, drawing from memory, he started playing Debussy's Clair de Lune, the piece he and Ji-won had danced to at their wedding. His technique was indeed rusty, fingers stumbling occasionally over the more complex passages. But as he continued playing, something awakened inside him. A joy he'd forgotten, a way of speaking without words. When he finished, the lobby remained silent for a long moment. Min-ho turned to find Ji-won wiping away a tear, while the twins sat with identical expressions of thoughtful assessment. "You missed several notes in the middle section," Ju-won observed clinically. "And your tempo was inconsistent," Sung-min added. Min-ho nodded, accepting the critique. "As I warned you, out of practice." "But," Ju-won continued, his voice softening, "your expression was authentic. You played like you meant it," Sung-min translated. "Like the music mattered." Coming from his passionately musical sons, Min-ho recognized these comments as the highest praise they could offer. Thank you, he said simply. Ji-won's eyes met his across the room, a world of shared memories in her gaze. I haven't heard you play since before we were married, she said softly. I haven't felt like playing since you left, Minho admitted. The twins exchanged another of their silent communications before Ji-won spoke. We should get to sleep. Early rehearsal tomorrow. As they rose to leave, Sungmin hesitated, then asked the question Minho had been dreading. After next week, when we go back to Seoul, what happens then? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Minho looked at his sons, nearly men now, but still searching for certainty in an uncertain world. That depends on you, he said honestly. I would like to remain part of your lives, in whatever capacity you'll allow. But I understand if you need more time, or if you decide. We haven't decided anything yet, Ji-won interrupted, his tone measured. That was the agreement. 3 weeks, then we decide. 1 week left, Sungmin added, his expression unreadable. As they disappeared into the elevator, Ji-won lingered in the lobby, watching Minho close the piano lid with careful reverence. They're warming to you, she observed quietly. Are they? Minho asked, desperate for reassurance yet afraid to hope. Sungmin asked if you would come to his solo competition next month, she revealed. He tried to sound casual about it. Minho's heart leapt. What did you tell him? That he should ask you himself, Ji-won replied with a small smile. Some questions need to be asked directly. As she turned to follow their sons, Ji-won paused. The piece you played, our wedding dance. You remembered, Minho said softly. Some things you don't forget, she answered. No matter how hard you try. Incredible, isn't it? Ji-won said, joining him at the railing. How different everything looks from up here. Perspective changes everything. Minho agreed, his eyes still on the twins. 3 weeks ago, I was Chairman Lee, the man who built an empire on the ruins of his personal life. And now I'm just trying to be their father, he said simply. The hardest role I've ever attempted. Ji-won's laugh was soft but genuine. Harder than negotiating the Vietnamese manufacturing contract? Far harder, Minho confirmed with a rueful smile. At least with business negotiations, I know the rules. They watched as Sungmin pointed out something to his brother, their animated conversation carrying across the observation deck despite the wind and the chatter of other tourists. Tomorrow's the final performance, Ji-won said after a comfortable silence. The Paris Conservatory is hosting a reception afterward. Minho nodded, trying to ignore the tightness in his chest. And then we fly home the next day. And decisions must be made, she added softly. Before Minho could respond, the twins approached, their cheeks flushed from the April breeze. We should go down soon if we want to make it to Montmartre before sunset, Ji-won said, consulting the meticulous itinerary he'd created for their free day. Always the schedule keeper, Sungmin teased, but without the edge that had characterized their earlier interactions. 3 weeks of constant togetherness had softened something between all of them. As they descended in the elevator, Minho felt a familiar vibration in his pocket. With a glance at his sons, he pulled out his phone to find another urgent message from Seoul. Board meeting called for Monday. Critical decisions pending. Confirmation of your return required. Sungmin, always observant, caught the subtle change in Minho's expression. Work again. Minho nodded, pocketing the phone without responding to the message. Nothing that can't wait. You've been saying that a lot, Ji-won noted with analytical precision. Won't Han Enterprises collapse without its visionary leader? There was something in his son's tone. A test, perhaps, or genuine concern masked by sarcasm. The company survived before me, Minho replied evenly. It will survive after me. After you. Ji-won echoed, surprise evident in her voice. Minho hadn't planned to have this conversation in a crowded Eiffel Tower elevator. But the moment presented itself and he refused to let it pass. I've been thinking about stepping back, he admitted. Not entirely, but significantly, taking an advisory role rather than day-to-day operations. The twins exchanged one of their cryptic glances as the elevator doors opened and they spilled out into the Parisian afternoon. "Why would you do that?" Sungmin asked bluntly as they walked toward the Seine. "Han Enterprises is your life." "That's the problem," Minho said quietly. "It became my whole life when it should have been just a part of it." They crossed the Pont d'Iéna in contemplative silence before Ju-won spoke again, his voice carefully neutral. "Is this because of us? Because you feel guilty?" The question was delivered with such precision that Minho felt it like a physical blow. He stopped walking, turning to face his sons directly. "It's because of me," he said firmly. "Because I finally understand what I sacrificed, and I don't want to make that mistake again." He paused, gathering his courage. "Whether or not you allow me to be part of your lives after tomorrow, I need to live differently. The price I've paid for success was too high." A street musician began playing nearby, the haunting notes of a violin solo providing an unexpected soundtrack to their conversation. Sungmin tilted his head, automatically identifying the piece. "Box Chacon," he murmured. "From Partita No. 2. One of the most difficult pieces in the violin repertoire," Minho noted, remembering his own musical education. Sungmin looked surprised. "You know it." "I used to listen to classical music while working," Minho admitted. "It was my connection to what I'd lost." The twins absorbed this information silently as they continued walking, the conversation shifting to lighter topics as they navigated the bustling streets toward Montmartre. As they climbed the steps to Sacré-Cœur Basilica, Minho fell into step beside Ji-won. "Did you mean what you said?" she asked quietly. "About stepping back from the company?" "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "I've already spoken with the board about transitioning to chairman emeritus." Ji-won's eyes widened. "That's significant." "It's necessary," Minho said simply, "regardless of what happens tomorrow." The sunset from Montmartre was everything the guidebooks promised, a symphony of gold and crimson painting the city of light. As they stood watching the spectacle, Sungmin suddenly turned to Minho. "Will you come to my Tchaikovsky competition?" he asked, the words tumbling out in a rush. "It's in 2 months, in Seoul." Minho felt his heart skip. "You want me there?" "Only if you actually show up," Sungmin qualified, his vulnerability immediately protected by defensiveness. "Not if you're going to be checking your phone every 5 minutes or leaving halfway through." "I'll be there," Minho promised solemnly. Front row, both hands visible and phone-free. A ghost of a smile touched Sungmin's lips before he turned back to the sunset. But the brief expression warmed Minho more than the Parisian sun. Later that night, after a dinner of traditional French cuisine that left them all pleasantly satisfied, they strolled along the Seine, the illuminated monuments creating a magical backdrop. Ji-won and Ju-won walked ahead, engaged in animated conversation about the logistics of tomorrow's performance. Minho found himself alone with Sungmin, a rare moment of privacy between them. "Mom never stopped loving you," Sungmin said abruptly, his eyes fixed on the river. "She tried to hide it, but we could tell, especially when she'd drink wine and play old records." Minho swallowed hard, unprepared for this revelation. "I never stopped loving her either," he admitted softly. "Then why didn't you fight for us?" The question held 18 years of hurt, delivered with the painful directness of youth. "Because I was a coward," Minho answered honestly. "Because business decisions were easier than personal ones. Because losing myself in work was less painful than facing what I destroyed." Sungmin absorbed this, his profile outlined against the city lights. "Ju-won wants to forgive you," he said after a long moment. "He believes in second chances, the logical approach." "And you?" Minho asked, barely breathing. "I'm still angry," Sungmin admitted, his hands gripping the stone balustrade. "But I'm tired of being angry. It takes too much energy." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was honesty, perhaps the most valuable currency between them. "Whatever you both decide tomorrow," Minho said carefully, "I want you to know that these 3 weeks have been the most important of my life." Sungmin nodded once, sharply, before changing the subject. We should catch up to them. Ju-won will panic if we mess up his perfectly scheduled evening. The night before the final performance, Min-ho lay awake in his hotel room, replaying every interaction, searching for clues about what the next day would bring. Sleep eluded him as he contemplated the possibility of returning to his empty soul penthouse, alone with his regrets and memories of these 3 precious weeks. Morning arrived with unsettling speed. The concert hall buzzed with activity as the young musicians prepared for their final European performance. Min-ho watched from the wings as his sons tuned their instruments, their focused expressions identical despite their different personalities. Ji-won appeared beside him, elegant in a simple black dress. "Nervous?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted. "Not about the performance, about after." She nodded, understanding. "They've been talking privately a lot, making their decision, I think. Have they given you any indication?" Ji-won shook her head. "This is between you and them. I've stayed neutral." "Thank you," Min-ho said sincerely, "for allowing me these weeks with them. With you." Something flickered in Ji-won's eyes, an emotion he couldn't quite identify. "The concert's about to begin," she said, gesturing toward their seats. The performance was flawless, the Seoul Youth Symphony receiving a standing ovation from the Parisian audience. As the congratulatory reception afterward wound down, Min-ho found himself cornered by the twins in a quiet alcove of the ornate concert hall. "We've made our decision," Ju-won announced without preamble. Min-ho's mouth went dry. "I'm listening." The twins glanced at each other before Ju-won continued, ever the spokesman for their joint thoughts. "We want to continue seeing you," he stated formally. "Sunday dinners, twice monthly minimum. You cook at least once a month." Min-ho felt dizzy with relief. "Yes," he agreed immediately. "Anything you want." "But," Sung-min interjected, his expression serious, "there are conditions." "Name them," Min-ho said, prepared to agree to almost anything. "You have to actually show up," Sung-min said fiercely. "Not just when it's convenient. Not just when work allows. Every time. No excuses. You have to be present when you're with us," Ju-won added. "Not checking emails or taking calls." Min-ho nodded solemnly. "I promise." And Sung-min continued, "You have to talk to grandmother." This condition caught Min-ho by surprise. "My mother." Ju-won's expression was somber. "We've never met our grandmother. If we're going to be a family, even a complicated one, that needs to change." Min-ho hesitated, thinking of his mother's rigid pride, her refusal to acknowledge Ji-won or their children. "She may not be willing," he warned gently. "Then you have to try anyway," Sung-min insisted. "We need to know you're willing to fight for us, even when it's difficult." The challenge in his son's eyes was unmistakable. This was the real test. Not the 3 weeks of attention and affection, but what would happen when obstacles arose. "I'll speak to her as soon as we return," Min-ho promised. "And regardless of her response, you'll meet her. I'll make sure of it." Something relaxed in both boys' postures, a tension Min-ho hadn't fully registered until it eased. "One more thing," Ju-won added quietly. "Mom comes to Sunday dinners too, at least sometimes." Min-ho looked across the room to where Ji-won stood chatting with the conductor, her profile achingly familiar despite the passing years. "If she's willing," he agreed softly. "She will be," Sung-min said with surprising certainty. "She pretends to be over you, but she's not." Before Min-ho could process this revelation, the twins were moving away, rejoining the celebration. He stood alone for a moment, overwhelmed by the gift he'd just been given. Not forgiveness, exactly, but opportunity. A chance to build something new from the ruins of what he'd destroyed. Later that night, as Paris slept around them, Min-ho found Ji-won on the hotel's rooftop terrace, gazing at the illuminated Eiffel Tower in the distance. "The boys told me their decision," she said without turning. "And their conditions. Including the one about you," Min-ho acknowledged, joining her at the railing. Ji-won nodded. "Quite the negotiators. They get that from you. Their stubbornness too, I suspect," Min-ho added with a small smile. No, that's all me, Ji-won corrected, finally turning to face him. Are you prepared for this, Min-ho? Really prepared? Because they've opened their hearts to you, and if you disappoint them again. I won't, he said firmly. Nothing is more important to me than making this right. Not the company, not my reputation, nothing. Ji-won studied him intently, as if searching for the man she'd once loved in the face of the successful stranger he'd become. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her. Sunday dinner, then, she said with a slight nod. 1 week after we return. I'll bring the ingredients, Min-ho promised. And my mother, if I can convince her. Good luck with that, Ji-won said dryly. The great Mrs. Lee acknowledging my existence after 18 years? I'd pay to see it. People can change, Min-ho said softly. I have. Ji-won's expression softened. Yes, you have. Though the real test comes when we return to real life. Deadlines and board meetings and all the pressures that pulled you away the first time. I'm not the same man I was, Min-ho insisted. And I'm not making the same mistakes again. The night breeze carried the distant sounds of the city around them as they stood together, not touching but closer than they'd been in nearly 2 decades. Do you remember the last time we were in Paris? Ji-won asked suddenly. Min-ho nodded. Our honeymoon, that little hotel in the Marais district. You promised me the world, she said, her voice tinged with remembered pain. You actually said those words. I'll give you the world, Ji-won. And instead I gave you absence, Min-ho acknowledged. I thought providing financially was enough. I was wrong. Ji-won turned back to the view, her profile outlined against the city lights. The boys are giving you a second chance, Min-ho. Don't waste it. And you? He asked quietly. Are you giving me a second chance too? The question hung between them, weighted with 18 years of separate lives, of hurt and regret, and paths diverged. Ask me again in a year, Ji-won finally replied. After 52 Sunday dinners. After you've proven to our sons that you mean what you say. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Min-ho felt something unfurl in his chest. Not quite hope, but its precursor. Possibility. 1 year, he agreed. 52 dinners. I'll be there for everyone. As the Paris night wrapped around them, Min-ho gazed at the woman he'd lost and the city that had witnessed both the beginning and, perhaps, the renewal of their story. Tomorrow they would fly back to Seoul, back to the reality of careers and obligations and the complicated dance of rebuilding what had been broken. But for tonight, standing beside Ji-won under the stars, Min-ho allowed himself to imagine a future where the word family meant more than an entry in his calendar, where it meant Sunday dinners and concert performances and arguments and reconciliations and all the messy, beautiful complications of love reclaimed. Stop fidgeting, his mother whispered beside him, her elegant figure straight-backed despite her 80 years. You look like a nervous schoolboy. Min-ho suppressed a smile. Madame Lee's presence tonight represented, perhaps his greatest victory since returning to his sons' lives. The battle to convince her had been monumental, with shouting matches that shook the walls of her traditional Hanok home. They're my grandsons, he'd finally declared. Your only grandsons. Would you rather die proud and alone, or swallow your pride and know your family? The question had hung between them for 3 painful weeks before his mother had appeared at his penthouse door one Sunday morning, dressed immaculately and carrying a small wooden box. These belong to your grandfather, she'd said stiffly, opening the box to reveal antique jade cufflinks. For the boys, if they'll accept them. Tonight marked her first public appearance with the family. A calculated risk, as half of Seoul's elite would be watching Sungmin compete in the final round. He'll be nervous, Min-ho said, checking his watch again. His mother sniffed. Talented musicians don't get nervous. They perform. Even talented musicians get nervous when their estranged grandmother is meeting them backstage after the biggest performance of their career, Ji-won said smoothly, joining their conversation. She looked stunning in a midnight blue dress, her hair swept up elegantly. Madame Lee's lips tightened, but she inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. The two women had established an uneasy truce, built primarily on their mutual devotion to the twins. It wasn't friendship, but it was civil progress that had seemed impossible 6 months earlier. "They're opening the doors," Ju-won announced, appearing at Min-ho's elbow. Unlike his twin, Ju-won had declined to compete, instead focusing on his applications to international universities. The acceptance letter from Cambridge still sat framed on Min-ho's desk, a bittersweet reminder that his newfound connection with his sons would soon stretch across continents. The hall filled quickly, wealthy patrons and music aficionados jostling for the best seats. Min-ho's assistant had secured them front-row positions, directly in Sungmin's line of sight. As they settled into their seats, Ju-won leaned toward Min-ho. "He's practicing box shakon as we speak. The one we heard in Paris." Min-ho felt a surge of emotion at the reference. "Is he ready?" "He's beyond ready," Ju-won replied with quiet confidence. "But he won't admit it." The lights dimmed as the judges took their places, renowned musicians from across the globe. Min-ho recognized several faces from business events. The arts and corporate worlds in Seoul often intersected at these prestigious competitions. When Sungmin walked on stage, Min-ho barely recognized him. Gone was the defensive teenager, replaced by a poised young man in a perfectly tailored suit. He bowed deeply to the audience, then raised his violin with quiet authority. The first notes of Tchaikovsky's violin concerto in D major filled the hall, technically brilliant but somewhat reserved. Min-ho could see the concentration in his son's face, the careful precision of each phrase. It was flawless but contained until suddenly something shifted. Sungmin's eyes found them in the audience, lingering briefly on the unexpected sight of his grandmother sitting rigidly between his parents. The music transformed. What had been technical excellence became raw emotion, the violin singing with a voice that seemed to contain all the unspoken words between them, grief and anger and tentative hope. Min-ho felt Ji-won's hand slip into his, a spontaneous gesture neither of them acknowledged but neither pulled away from. By the time the concerto concluded, there wasn't a dry eye in the front row. Not even Madame Lee's, though she would later vehemently deny it. The judges' deliberations stretched for what felt like hours. When they finally announced Sungmin as the gold medalist, the hall erupted. Min-ho found himself on his feet, applauding until his hands hurt, his vision blurred with uncharacteristic tears. Backstage was chaos, well-wishers and competitors swarming around the winners. When they finally reached Sungmin, he was flushed with triumph but visibly nervous as he faced his grandmother for the first time. "Halmione," he said formally, bowing deeply. Madame Lee studied him with piercing eyes. "You rushed the coda," she said finally. A tense silence fell before she added, "But your interpretation of the adagio was remarkable." Coming from his mother, Min-ho knew this qualified as effusive praise. Sungmin seemed to understand as well, his posture relaxing slightly as he bowed again. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. "I brought you something," Madame Lee replied, producing the wooden box. "For both of you." As she presented the cufflinks and explained their provenance, Min-ho watched his sons absorb this connection to their heritage, a lineage they'd been denied until now. Later, at the celebration dinner, Min-ho watched his mother actually smile as Ju-won described his planned studies at Cambridge. The restaurant's private room hummed with conversation, the awkwardness of their early gatherings giving way to something approaching comfortable familiarity. "I didn't think she'd come," Ji-won murmured, joining Min-ho at the window overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But she's always been stubborn. Once she decides something, nothing stops her. Like someone else I know," Ji-won observed with a small smile. 6 months of Sunday dinners had softened something between them. Not romance. Not yet. But a tentative friendship built on shared pride in their sons and cautious respect for the people they'd become during their years apart. "Cambridge," Min-ho said, changing the subject. "It's so far. You can visit," Ji-won reminded him. "You still have that corporate jet, I assume?" Min-ho nodded, though the company jet had seen far less use since his transition to chairman emeritus. The board had initially panicked at his decision to step back, predicting disaster. Instead, Profits had increased under his hand-selected successor, while Minho found himself busier than ever with the foundation he'd established to support young musicians from disadvantaged backgrounds. "And Sungmin?" he asked. "Has he decided about Juilliard?" "He's leaning toward it," Ji-won confirmed, "though he's considering the Seoul Conservatory to stay closer to home." She hesitated. To all of us. The implication wasn't lost on Minho, that all of us now included him, that his presence was a factor in his son's decision about the future. "I told him to go to New York," Minho said quietly. "That distance doesn't have to mean absence. I've learned that lesson." Across the room, Sungmin laughed at something his grandmother said, the sound so unexpected that several heads turned in surprise. 24 Sunday dinners, Ji-won mused, following Minho's gaze. "You haven't missed one. I made a promise." "Yes, you did." She turned to face him fully. 28 to go before my deadline." Minho's heart quickened at the reference to their conversation in Paris. "You're still counting?" "Of course I am," Ji-won replied, her eyes holding his. "Aren't you?" Before he could respond, they were interrupted by the twins, eager to discuss plans for the upcoming holidays. The first they would spend together as a family in 18 years. As the evening wound down, Madame Lee surprised everyone by inviting them all to celebrate Seollal at her home. "It's tradition," she stated firmly, as if she hadn't excluded them for nearly 2 decades. "Family should be together for the new year." The word family hung in the air, significant in its casual use. Minho caught Ji-won's eye across the table and saw his own wonder reflected there, at how far they'd come, at how much further they might go. Later, after driving his mother home, Minho stood on the balcony of his penthouse. The city spread below him like a constellation of earthbound stars. His phone buzzed with a message from Sungmin, a rare initiation of contact outside their scheduled times together. "Thank you for tonight, for everything, for showing up." 3 simple sentences that contained worlds of meaning. Minho typed his response carefully. "Always, I promise." As he gazed out at the city where he'd built his empire while losing what mattered most, Minho reflected on the strange journey of the past 6 months. The empire still stood, but its importance had diminished in direct proportion to the growing richness of Sunday dinners, violin practices, and tentative conversations that sometimes lasted deep into the night. His phone buzzed again, Ji-won this time. "Lunch tomorrow? Just us. We should talk about the boys' summer plans." Minho smiled at the transparent excuse. In 6 months, they'd never met without the twins present. A buffer zone of safety neither had been willing to cross until now. 1 p.m. at the cafe near your studio? He suggested, heart racing like a teenager's. The response came quickly. "I'll be there." 24 down, 28 to go. But suddenly, Minho wasn't counting anymore. Not when each day brought its own small miracle. A shared laugh with Sungmin, an academic debate with Ji-won, a civil conversation with his mother, and now, perhaps, a new beginning with Ji-won. The night wind carried the scent of cherry blossoms, not yet visible but preparing to bloom. Seoul's springtime transformation was still weeks away, but Minho could feel it coming, the promise of renewal after a long, cold absence. Like the city below him, he too was on the verge of something new. Something built not on the wealth and power he'd spent his life accumulating, but on the far more valuable currency of presence, of promises kept, of showing up again and again until trust bloomed like the cherry blossoms along the Han River. Tomorrow would bring lunch with Ji-won. Sunday would bring another family dinner. "Professor Williams thinks my thesis proposal has merit," Ji-won was explaining, his voice animated in a way Minho had rarely heard before. "Computational models of cultural diffusion aren't typically explored from an East Asian